Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 52nd KVIFF International Film Festival. My name is Neil Young. I'm from the United Kingdom. I'm a critic, programmer, filmmaker, and I'm delighted to see so many people here today for today's KVIFF Talk with Paul Laverty and Ken Loach. As a British person, it's enormously a matter of honour and pride to be able to be with my fellow countrymen today. They've been recipients of the Crystal Globe, as you probably know, yesterday, and also they're here in conjunction with the 30th anniversary of the European Film Academy, and their films Sweet 16 and Land and Freedom were shown today, have been shown at the festival. Land and Freedom shown today. I'm sure many of you saw that. They need no introduction from me. They're the only writing, directing team to have won 2 Palme d'Ors. I, Daniel Blake, most recently. Ken Loach's history with the film festival goes back a very long way, and we'll be talking about that. One little bit of housekeeping. When our guests arrive, if those who wish to take photographs could do so in the first minute or so, that'd be much appreciated, because especially if there's flashing lights, it can be a little bit distracting. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our guests today, Paul Laverty and Ken Loach. If you'd prefer to stand, we can stand. Why not?
Otherwise, we have no eye line, do we?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, perfectly fine. Yeah. As I said at the introduction, there, your history with the KVIFF Film Festival goes back some decades. I believe you. Well, of course, you won the Crystal Globe for the very first time with KESS in 1970. It wasn't your first visit to the festival.
No. But I came in, I think it was 1967, with a film called Poor Cow, which was the first feature film I'd done. And it was, and then came again in 1970. And it was very touching for us, because in 1967 there was an optimistic mood. And people were very positive, and then in 1970, of course, it was very different. And we had a connection to Czech filmmaking. Shall I say that? Yeah. The cameraman who worked on KESS was a man called Chris Menges, a very, very fine cameraman. I'd worked with him on Poor Cow. He'd been the camera operator, and then he was the main cameraman on KESS. But in between, he'd worked with Miroslav Ondřiček, who shot many of the films of the Czech New Wave. And Chris learned a lot in that, and we tried to use what we'd learned in KESS. But there was another connection, which is when we were filming KESS in August of 1968, we were hearing news of the Soviet invasion. So, of course, Chris felt particularly connected because of his friendship, and we all felt very touched by it. So when I came back in 1970, it was it was more than just a stranger coming back. We felt we had some connection.
And your longtime producer, Rebecca O'Brien, she said that what you learned from the Czech New Wave was simple devices to tell the truth. Would that be a fair way of putting it?
Yes, I think that's true. It was to do with light, to do with camera positions, to do with lenses, quite technical things, really. Or at least what we thought we learned. I mean, we may have misjudged it. We may have taken something different to what was actually went on, but this was our interpretation. And a very simple, economical way of telling a story. Yeah.
And you have said in the past that your favourite film, if one can have a favourite film, is a Czech film. I believe it's Loves of a Blonde.
Yes, yeah, that one. All of them are. Our group responded to very warmly and liked them a lot. Loves of a Blonde is my favourite, but Closely Observed Trains, the Jerzy Menzel film, and all of them of that time. I think also when you see things when you're young, they stay with you for the rest of your life, and they become part of how you approach work. So they certainly did that.
And for you, Paul, your history with Karlovy Vary, is it your first time here? And do you also have a love for the Czech cinema, perhaps transmitted to you by Ken, who I know is a very close friend as well as a collaborator?
Yeah, it was. I remember meeting Ken, when we first met, telling me about these wonderful films, and they made a great impression on me too. I just watched them for the stories. I thought they were very, very elegant, and what I loved was the sense of the gentle humour of them. They really made you smile, and I still love seeing a film like that. When you see something that's insightful and humane and funny, I mean, who could forget? The Closely Observed Trains. Drawing on the human body. It's just magical and funny and brilliant writing, beautifully delivered. So when you do see films that are just witty and smart like that, they always fill you up. It's what you want to do when you go to cinema, isn't it? To be surprised and entertained. So I love them as well. And then I had the good fortune of coming here just to watch films once 17 years ago, and we met the wonderful Abbas Kiarostami, who was on the jury, and my partner was on the jury that year, and she told us great stories about Abbas just wanted to spread the prizes as widely as possible, sometimes sharing them to share the happiness. And he was a very, 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 very funny man. And in fact, one of his films, Looking for My Friend's House, was similar in tone, I think. Observational, a real sense of. I think he had a very special. I think he taught for a long time, so he spent time with children, and that film was about a child, having problem with his homework. It was so simple, but absolutely beautiful and very, very moving. And I love it when you can get something on the surface that looks simple, but is actually, deeply psychological and very, very humane.
At this point, I would say if we could stop the photography now, because it does get a bit distracting with all the flashes. Thank you. Obviously, speaking about the stories of the children and the very real stories that Kiarostami told, Kes, and I think another thing that you drew from the Czech cinema, again, I read a quote that you said the sense isn't that people are performing, the sense is that the people are being, and I think that quest for just simple truth. I mean, it's such a simple thing to say, but it's so hard to find in cinema. Is something that in both of your in your long collaboration now, and again the actors that you've worked with, the performers you've worked with, is that also something that you look particularly to the Czech? I don't know Italian neorealism. I mean, it's not just the one-way street, but is that something that you also took from those Czech films?
Yes, absolutely. When you, in the film you mentioned, Loves of a Blonde. I mean, the parents of the young boy, the young musician, the mother particularly, does very little, but you can read everything that's in her mind, and smile at her, and understand her, and I think that's very important in films, that you have to let the audience read the characters without sense of a performance, because I think once there's a sense of a performance, I find I get alienated. And also, if somebody is a well-known, if they're a big star, you remember their life outside the film, and then it becomes not so interesting. You don't believe them, and you want the audience to believe in the characters, the people in the film, and if you, sometimes we've worked with people who aren't professional actors, but they're maybe comics. They do stand-up comedy, or they we did a film called The Wind That Shakes the Barley about the Irish War of Independence, and there's an older woman in that. I mean, an older woman in that, and also we did a film called Jimmy's Hall in Ireland as well, and again there's a mother of 65, 70, and both had to be farming women who had lived their lives on a farm, a peasant really, in traditional language, you know, an older peasant woman. Well, the idea of finding an actress who would give you the sense of that, of living on the land, very difficult. But we found two wonderful women, and in a way the camera could be a documentary about them and how they stood, and their skin tones, and how they used language, and the lines on their faces. I mean, that you're looking at something really authentic then, and that then communicates to the rest of the film. So I think that's important.
I rewatched Kess just at the weekend as preparation, a film I've seen, like every British person of a certain age. You watch Kess, it's just part of life. It's true. I mean, everybody knows that film. And David Bradley, the main actor, had never been in a film before. Colin Welland, I believe, had never been in a film before. He'd been in, obviously, Z-Cars and things like this, and won the BAFTA for that performance. So even from the very top to the smallest parts, we see this kind of quest for truth. And a very small part in the film Land and Freedom was played by an unknown actor called Paul Laverty. A scene-stealing performance as a rabid demagogue, as Paul himself described. And there's a line that Paul has in the film: "What is a revolution? It's nothing but a radical change in privilege, wealth, and power." And this feels like a line that was comes from the heart and could actually sort of determine the rest. But sadly, that was the only time you ever acted in a film, Paul. Is that right?
And that is no surprise, really, once you've seen the film. Yeah. Yes, the phone never stopped ringing. Yes. Mostly insults. Yeah. How did you destroy that beautiful film, Laverty? Yeah.
But even though your character is just simply referred to as Fifth Militiaman, you know, you do get a close-up, and you do get to deliver. You do hold the screen when you're delivering your impassioned speech. And
at least I survived. Yeah, some met the bullet. So it was very funny in that shoot, because many of us were not, we'd never been on a shoot before, and so among the group, because we shoot in sequence and we didn't get the scripts, you know, many days in advance. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And then it was a great shock to us, actually, when people, our compañeros, were kind of shot or disappeared. And especially at the end, I'm making a joke about it now, but when, I don't know if you've seen the film or not, but when Blanca gets shot at the end, we had no idea that was going to happen. And it's something I learned from Ken, that it's very difficult to play shock. If you do it, it's oftentimes false, and you know, you're thinking about it. But when Blanca was shot, I remember we were absolutely gobsmacked. We were really in the moment, and we thought, this is our friend who's been killed, you know, and we're all very, very upset. And I was actually surprised about how it actually worked. And ever since then, I've seen Ken do this with other. It was a great moment, and maybe you tell the story of looking for Eric when Big Eric Cantona popped out.
This is Eric Cantona, the footballer.
Do you know the footballer?
Yeah.
Yes,
Paul wrote this story of Eric Cantona, the famous footballer, who is becomes a presence in the room due to the fact that the story is the person the story is about, which is another man called Eric, much smaller, very unsuccessful, broken marriage, children out of control, a house he can't afford. Everything is wrong in his life compared to Eric Cantona, for whom everything is perfect. So little Eric, as we called him, has a spliff, and in the haze of his smoking, he looks at the portrait of Eric in his room, because he's a big fan of Eric Cantona, and the dress speaks to it. And then behind it, as Paul had written, the voice of, he hears in his head, the voice of Eric Cantona himself. Turns round, and then the cannabis does its work, and there in front of him is Eric Cantona. But when we shot it, of course, we really had Eric Cantona there. but how to get the shock in the eyes of little Eric, a man called Steve Evans. Steve. So we said to Steve, well, we said at this, we filmed it up to that point, and then I said, Steve, we've got to change the lighting now. Do you mind just, going out, have a cigarette, because he always had a smoke. I said, have a cigarette for 10 minutes. So Eric Cantona, who was waiting in an adjoining room, came into this very small room, and we put black cloths over the camera, and Eric crouched beneath these cloths. And then we arranged that when little Eric was looking at the picture, big Eric would get out and stand at the other side of the room. It was very hot in that room. And anyway, I said, come back in, see. So Steve came back in. He said, what's the cloth doing? I said, oh, it's just to stop the light reflecting back onto the scene. So he said, okay. So he played the scene, and Eric came out and stood behind him. And Steve turned round, and of course the look of sheer horror, shock, disbelief on his face. He couldn't have done that without seeing Eric Cantona in the flesh, who was a very big and impressive man, really, and a legend, of course. So that's what we did.
He filled the room with his presence.
He filled the room with his presence.
I've seen him he can fill a football stadium.
He can,
with his
yeah.
presence, never mind a small room.
Yeah, yeah.
And also, of course, Ithiar, your partner, she was also an actress. You met her on the set of the film, so it was a pivotal film for you in many ways, Land and Freedom.
Yeah, I've got a lot to blame Ken Loach for when you think about it. Yeah. It's very funny because there's a scene when she gets very, very angry with her fellow compañeros. She's marching around with a brush, and they're not taking it seriously. And at one point, she goes absolutely crazy at them. And it's funny, she hasn't changed at all, really. We've got 3 sons together now, so sometimes she gets really, really angry at us. And then she'll do exactly what she did in Land and Freedom. And then we said, oh, she's doing her Land and Freedom again. And that doesn't help things either.
As if Ken is directing her. Because people say that there are 15 collaborations. I'm not going to list them all because everybody, these are such wonderful films. It's really 16 if we include Land and Freedom, and that takes us back 22 years. That's an incredible. It's longer than most marriages, actually. I think statistically. And I've heard quotes like "you're joined at the hip" and "you're first of all friends" and things like this. But is it all bread and roses? Is it all milk and honey? There must be. Do you ever have like big rows? As I say, you seem to be such a harmonious, and we celebrate that. We love that. But behind the scenes, do you ever raise your voice with each other?
Only if it's a bad phone line, really. Yeah, only if it's a bad line. No, it wouldn't work really. You've got to enjoy each other's company and share the same basic ideas about how society is run, the same basic political analysis. To be serious about it. The same thing's got to make you smile. The same thing's got to make you angry. The same thing's got to make you sad. You've got to have that in common. Otherwise, you'd have a different and a similar aesthetic idea as well. What kind of films you want to make in terms of how they look and everything. So no, it's got to be harmonious. It wouldn't work otherwise. It's fine.
Because, of course, Land and Freedom was written by the wonderful Jim Allen, who very sadly died a few years after that in 1999, I think. Jim passed away.
Yeah.
So you did have working relationships with really outstanding writers.
Yeah.
And you, Paul, you'd been it's a well-known story. You'd been living in Nicaragua. You'd been working as a lawyer. And it was kind of what the Hollywood studios, in the terrible phrase they call a spec script. You'd written an idea for a film. You'd written a screenplay. And you just sent it to Ken through the post? Is that... it seems too good to be true.
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't quite like that. I was working in Nicaragua. I spent 2.5 years in Central America and been up to El Salvador and Guatemala. So I had been an eyewitness to the war. And I suppose I was getting very jumpy having seen all this, and I'd written a lot of, journalistic stuff and human rights reports, but always feeling that it was very frustrating not to try and communicate something beyond that. So in my naivety, I thought it would be wonderful to try and make a film about this. And so I prepared it would be called a summary, I suppose, a treatment. I hate that word, just with some notions of what it might be. And I'd recently seen one of Ken's films, Riff Raff. I'd seen other ones previously, and I loved the sensibility of that film. I love the actors.
Ricky Tomlinson.
Ricky Tomlinson. I don't know if you've seen Riff Raff. It's very, 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 very. Again, it's in a beautiful premise. It looks like quite a small story on the surface, a group of workers together, and there's a relationship in the middle of it too. But it just by seeing them and being with them, many, many much bigger questions are asked, and it's also so it's got a lovely political undertone which is implicit, but also a great kind of surface quality of humour and humanity about it. So I wrote to Ken.
Ricky Tomlinson in the shower, of course.
That's right. It's on the.
After Janet Leigh, I think it's the most famous shower scene in cinema.
Yeah, I think, and more deadly as well. I think. I think those three women must have had a heart attack. Yeah.
We'll be rushing to YouTube after this. It's an amazing man.
It's worth catching Riff Raff. It's a lot of fun, and. So I wrote to Ken, and I was amazed when he wrote back, because I'd written to some other people too who didn't answer or said, "Are you crazy going off to Central America, in a war zone?" And Ken said, "Let's meet up for a cup of tea." And what I loved about that first meeting was just his sense of curiosity, not about like whether I could write or not, which I didn't know if I could, but what he did was he gave me great encouragement, and he just said, "We'll try and write a few scenes." Because I'd written a summary of what the story was. And I don't know for some writers or film students here, but to write a summary of something is absolutely, completely different from actually giving a scene just life. And what I found was it was just intoxicating, because you gave someone a name, they had to have a job, and it was just the joy of hearing them speak. And I was just amazed at what a thrill I got from that. And so I sent Ken down a few draft scenes, and then he was even more encouraging, and we managed to get a commission to write the screenplay. But it took a long time, because I think Ken had all these other films in front, further developed with Jim Allen and other writers, and so it took a long time to actually make it. But what was great was he went out to Central America, into Nicaragua, into another language, and had great curiosity, and I don't think I would seriously have found anyone else who would be so silly to do that.
And that of course, Carla's song, 96, and it's been a steady flow of films. I think every 2 years, like a metronome, there was a film coming out. And you say there about Ken having another project, developing projects, because I believe that the way that it works between the two of you, and it is a team, of course, with other people. The script editor, Roger Smith, I know is a very important member of the team who isn't with us, but with us in spirit today. And I understand that you're kind of filming one film, and then, Paul, you're developing the next film. So in a way, you're kind of having to sort of juggle many projects. Or are you kind of mono-focused? Is it like, I'm now filming this, I don't think about the next one?
Well, I think we did that for a year or two, but no, we've done more or less one at a time for the last couple of years. Can I just say, Ian, I mean, Paul and I were very concerned that we turn up and we speak English and we're in another country and it just seems really arrogant. And so we asked if there could be someone who would translate if someone wanted to speak Czech. So if anyone wants to ask a question in Czech or hear a summary of what we're going to say, if it's worth summarising, I think that's something we're just really aware of, and hate the arrogance of bloody English people or Scottish people turning up, speaking their language, and expecting everybody to understand. And it just seems it mirrors the political power in the world, and we just hate that. So just so that you know. Okay.
But that's no excuse for not understanding a Glaswegian language accent, by the way.
And that obviously brings us to, we're not going to go through film by film, but My Name is Joe, which is the second film, which is set in, Paul, your native Scotland, and you work with the incredible Peter Mullen, who won Best Actor in Cannes. The films that you made, I mean, it's geographically, you know, Los Angeles for the next film, and then we go to Ireland, and then we go, you know, all over the place. But that was the one where you were able to use, and I know you've spoken about this before, that you're particularly comfortable writing in the voice and the idiom of how people speak in Scotland. Is that a fair comment?
Oh yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think, you know, writing for, you know, when Joe came into my head, you know, you didn't have to really think about it. You just heard him, and so to have someone as good as Peter to give life to that, I think we were both, you know, Ken spends a lot of time doing casting, and I think we caught Peter at a fantastic moment. And there's something, he's a very smart man, he's very, very quick, but there's also a kind of a great warmth to him, but there's also a sense of danger about him, very mercurial, and that's the way I imagine Joe. So it wasn't, so what we never kind of create a character for someone, we just try and find the person who will give best life to it. But it's definitely true, it's much easier where, for example, we've done films in, like I say, in Los Angeles or Nicaragua, and it's also another language, another culture. So you're always very respectful of that. Someone from Guatemala is not the same as someone from El Salvador, or someone who's grew up in Mexico City, or from someone who's grown up in the countryside. I mean, they're literally different territories and different people, although they have might speak the same language but very different accents. So always try to respect that when you're writing the character and when we come to cast it. And so it is much easier to do it in home territory.
I mean, I mean, I think the audience that you have to satisfy is the audience that knows the story best. So in the case of Nicaragua, it was the Nicaraguan people who we'd worked with during the shooting. They had to they had to feel that it was their film. So the girl in it was really difficult to find a girl in Nicaragua. And the girl, it was originally going to be about a singer, but we found a girl, a dancer. So Paul changed it so that it was about a dancer. But actually that test of authenticity has to be with the people who really know whether it's authentic or not. Which is why I think we all hate these Euro pudding films, you know, where you have a Frenchman playing a German, speaking a German, playing a German in an English language with a German accent, and all that nonsense, which destroys it. You know, it destroys it. You've betrayed the subject the moment someone opens their mouth, really. And I think that I feel that I think we both feel that very strongly. And just the other thing, following on from what Paul said, the most difficult place to film it, of all those places that you mentioned, you know, Ireland, Scotland, England, Spain, Nicaragua, Los Angeles was the most difficult, by far the most difficult. Bureaucratic, full of petty regulations, the most expensive, the most obstructive. People telling you can't film on this street even though you have permission because it'll interfere with their trade, you know, their right to make profit. So stop you filming. I mean, the most difficult place to film was Los Angeles.
But I think, you know, it is one of the great Los Angeles films because you go to Los Angeles, it's a Spanish-speaking city as well as, you know, and to actually have a film about Spanish-speaking political stuff going on in Los Angeles, as opposed to, nothing wrong with a car chase, but, you know, it is nice to see what reality is going on. I remember reading Rebecca O'Brien, or hearing her saying that when she went to get money for that film, she actually had less money when she came back from Cannes than when she went there because nobody wanted to fund that film.
No, it's very interesting that because I mean the people in the film were absolutely brilliant, and there were people I'd come across when I was over there. It was an organisation called Justice for Janitors. So many of the people who are, sorry to turn my back here, many of the people we met were just absolutely remarkable. I mean some of the stories that people told us of crossing from, you know, Guatemala through Mexico up through the border, getting into the country with coyotes, you know, risking their lives, very, very dangerous. I remember there's a tragic story of one mum who'd saved up all her money. they'd crossed several countries. I think it was from Guatemala, and then at the very last border they got caught. Then they were sent back again. Then she had to start saving money again for the next 3 years, and they're up again at that point. But this time they'd got through. So when you listen to people's stories, they were actually heroic, you know, and told in the most offbeat, steady fashion, not to exaggerate it. But when you listen to how brave they were and what they'd risked, and then what was very interesting too, and this is what attracted us to the story too, when they tried to organise a trade union as cleaners against some of the most powerful companies in downtown Los Angeles, they were threatened with being deported once again. So they knew fine that if they were going to try and join a trade union and try and get health rights, which was something that would radically change their lives, and join a trade union, they could be threatened with deportation again, but they still did it. You know, and so many of the people that we met who were in the film gave us advice, and they were just terrific people to be with. Very, very nourishing, and I think that's what we found in every project we've done, because you never know how a film's going to work out. But in the process of making it, and the people you come across, you know, from that film, and more recently in Daniel Blake, we just met so many brilliant people that give you great nourishment and teach you so much along the way.
And you're present on, I believe you're on this, I'll try to speak a bit louder. I believe you're present on the set when the films are being made, because many writers will tell you that they are excluded. I'll try for this one. The writers will tell you that they are excluded or they are not welcome to the set, but it's always been your policy, Ken, to have the writer there to refer.
Go for the coffees. Yeah.
Yes. Well, yes, I mean, Paul comes along to some of the auditions when we're finding people. It comes to the, you know, as much as he can, really, to when we're shooting. And we'll sometimes, because obviously, you know, when you're shooting, there's lots of things to look out for. And I will sometimes miss things that are happening in the scene, and Paul will spot it. So, you know, we'll have a quiet word, and that's really useful. So I don't understand the idea. Why wouldn't you want a writer there? I mean, they've always been welcome because they know what the project is better than anyone. So why wouldn't you know, lend an ear? I mean, but Barry Hines used to come, who wrote Kess, and he'd just be falling about with laughter at his own jokes, and that was very nice because everybody communicates a great sense of good humour. And Jim Allen would come along, and he'd be engaging in political discussion with the crew, and that kept our focus on politics. So and everyone, it's part of the team. Why on earth would you not want the writer there?
And I know it's a recurring misconception, which it's one of those things that won't die, is that your films have lots of improvisation in them. And I know that there is some latitude for the actors to contribute, but I know that, you know, these scripts are very carefully written. I mean, these are probably, but in a way, it's the pitfall of they seem so real that some people watch them and go, oh, they're just making it up as they go along, and does that get annoying for you as well? I know it annoys you, Paul.
Well, it's like a pianist, you know, playing a Schubert impromptu. You should feel the pianist has just sat down and just created it in the moment, whereas, of course, it's written by a composer. But you should just sense the spontaneity of the music, and I suppose that's what we try and do, really.
And the trust, of course, I know that you've spoken in the past, Paul, about the actual writing of scripts is sometimes, it can come quite quickly, and the script can be written relatively quickly, whereas the research, I get the sense, is something that you would happily research a project for 10 years. Is that fair? To you, is the joy also in the research and actually speaking to people and listening to people?
Yes, and also to figure out what the story is. For example, you know, we could pick any one of them, but Daniel Blake, you know, the last one, I mean, it came out of a concern that both Ken and myself felt about the brutality of how a certain section of the population was being treated after the crisis in the banks, the austerity programme, and we spoke to experts, and they found out that, you know, people who are disabled, for example, were suffering 6 times more from the cuts proportionately than anyone else. So that led us to very interesting areas. We ended up going to the food banks, and then you'd hear stories of people choosing between food and heat. Then we found out about people who'd been sanctioned. That means they were given penalties by the government.
The benefits can be withdrawn.
Yes, be withdrawn. So that was actually an arbitrary decision taken like that, which the year before the film was made was handed out over 1 million times, which, you know, totally devastated families. And it was a political decision to punish people, often for the most, you know, unbelievable reasons, which if someone had told Ken and myself about this beforehand, we would have found it hard to believe. And that was what was happening. Under the surface, there was this systematic cruelty by the state to very vulnerable people. So by talking to people, seeing them, you know, when a mother is furious about having to give her children biscuits after an unfair sanction, and you see the anger and frustration, you never forget that because it's visceral, you know. And so we heard a lot of stories like that, and I think that gave us the energy. I remember talking to Ken, and we said, this film has to be raw. You know, it was about basic things: house, food, heat. These are the things that, you know, people have fought for since time immemorial. But there we were in the 5th richest economy, dealing with that. But the people we met, we weren't copying stories. We were trying to understand it. Then we had to understand the complexity of the welfare system for young people, for mothers, for disabled. So there was 1 million choices. And then what we had to do was forget it all and then go back again to what we kind of felt. And then I suppose once we had, you know, I drafted out a few characters and we talked about it again. And we felt this would be a good premise for a story. And then I just wrote it, you know, very, very quickly. But that was only possible because of all the talks we'd had beforehand. And because we were nourished by all those faces and those people. And I mean, I remember writing it feeling absolutely furious. Because you remember the humiliation of people, you know, had to sell off their property or their children going hungry. Or that scene, you know, where they actually eat cold beans. That was a story that we were told about. So it's all kind of truthful, but it was filtered through, you know, many different stories that we heard.
And there was an amazing statistic where some research that you were quoting that said people thought that 25% of the welfare budget was illegally being claimed, and in fact it's 1%, I think.
It's less than 1%. But there's a very good point in that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it just shows you how grand lies in this day when you think, you know, knowledge is just everywhere at a fingertip. You know, that was the majority of the population thought that 25% of the welfare budget was claimed fraudulently. And it's like it's 0.6. And much of that is dwarfed by people who didn't claim their benefits. So what they'd actually sold us was an absolute massive lie.
Yeah, maybe worth saying, I mean, this is obviously specific to our country, but I mean, our understanding is that the principle applies across Europe, really.
And also in North America, I think in the US.
Oh, yeah.
Gonna be, I mean, the film came out in May last year in Cannes, obviously won the Palme d'Or. Within a month we had Brexit. I'm not saying that was a consequence of you winning the Palme d'Or, but in retrospect, the kind of questions that film raised, and because the film was a remarkable success. I mean, in Britain, it took everybody by surprise. I was following the box office and the way that people are talking about it. You had some help from your friend at the Sunday Times, Camilla Long, who was the most effective. She was how do we put this, a right-wing film critic who accused you of all sorts of stuff, and then there became a huge media storm, and the box office increased.
Can I just say something about Camilla Long? She's obviously a very she writes for a very right-wing newspaper, and the film is set in Newcastle, and we discovered that she does in fact have a connection with Newcastle, because she is a descendant of the 3rd Duke of Newcastle. So she's obviously well equipped to write about the experience of the ordinary working class people of that city.
But you know, if you look at what effect that film had in terms of the national conversation, again, you know, there are many different factors that feed into how things happen. But here we are, just weeks after a general election, in which the conversation, I mean, you've said yourself in the festival newspaper, you know, it's a critical moment. The balance could be shifting here. And things like a film like I, Daniel Blake, which is talked about, maybe not everybody saw the film, but everybody knew that the film existed and they were aware of that conversation. I mean, for you, you've been making films for, let's say, 50 years and working before that. I mean, how does it feel that finally you've been knocking on a door and the public has finally swung it open and gone, Ken Loach, this is your moment?
Well, no. I mean, it comes and goes, you know, and we shouldn't exaggerate what films can do. I mean, they're just a film. It depends what happens when people leave the cinema, of course. But I think you're right that it is. I mean, we have the sense, and it'd be interesting to know what people think actually here. But we have the sense that politics is shifting really across Europe. It seemed that it was moving irrevocably to the right 2 or 3 years ago, and that the right were getting stronger in all parts of Europe. We had a very hard, very far right party that was becoming very popular. Obviously in France is Marine Le Pen. Obviously there are elements in your part of Europe as well. But there's certainly the left in Britain has taken a huge leap forward. And it's not the old left of Tony Blair or Hollande, you know, of actually doing the employer's work for them instead of looking after the interests of ordinary people. It's a left that bases itself on what people need and are prepared to restructure the economy to achieve that, not just to say, oh yes, well, you know, we can't put up taxes because the rich don't pay anyway, which is what the right-wing say. But to say, no, we have to restructure the economy. We have to return to the idea that we own things in common, and we have to learn the lessons from the past so that we don't make the same mistakes that people made when they did that before. So thinking anew, finding a new way forward. And Jeremy Corbyn has embodied that in Britain. And I think there's signs in the French election that although one didn't make the ballot paper, that there is a new left appearing there. Certainly Bernie Sanders in the States. And we feel it, but it'd be interesting to know if you have any sense of that in your part of the world at all. I don't know.
I know you're very keen to get questions from the audience. Maybe if
or comments.
Or comments, yeah. But I know, Paul, you live in Madrid. I think I'm right in saying. Or you were living in Madrid for quite a while.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. And
in Podemos, would that be the equivalent in Spain of those?
Yes,
movements?
well, I'm back in Scotland now, but I have friends who are in Podemos or active with Podemos, and actually we were talking about power and how it operates. We had myself had a very interesting meeting with Yanis Varoufakis, you know, from Greece, who has been trying to develop an alternative voice in the left too. And it was very, very interesting too. He told us of a conversation that he had with Schäuble, who's the Minister of Finance in Germany. And they were very, very keen to help Yanis. He was surprised if they came out of the euro. But if they're in the euro, he says, we're going to screw you because we must screw Podemos. They were very, very... They saw it as incredibly important that they didn't see a successful left-wing populist party in Spain. And in many ways, that's what happened. You know, many people in Spain were very sympathetic because the corruption in Spain is unbelievable. I mean, the stories you hear again and again are just I mean, the amount of money found in Swiss banks is remarkable, connected with the party. But many people in Spain, they did look at Greece. They saw how it was impoverished despite the referendum, and I think there was real fear there that if they went down the path of supporting Podemos, they could the same thing could happen to them. So it was interesting to see how, you know, powerful people were looking at it as well. So they're still there, but they've passed their crest. So I think there'll be a great challenge now for them, you know, to make contact again and get that level of popularity back.
I know you've quoted Woody Guthrie about what's a human but a great big hoping machine. I mean, is this a time when we can afford ourselves a little bit of hope? Because it's very easy to be cynical and just, you know, oh, here we go again. But I mean, do you when you're walking around Scotland at the moment, do you think this is it?
Well, I mean, you know, I think this happy clappy kind of idea of just being hopeful for being hopeful. I mean, it flies in the face of sometimes the hard evidence, but you're always surprised. I think you're always. I mean, I think that for us in the UK to see how far behind Jeremy Corbyn was in the opinion polls. There was studies done, and he was minus 25% in relation to the public perception of him when the campaign started. And Theresa May was massively ahead. And to think that, you know, that was turned around, and I think perhaps if it had another week, or perhaps even if the fire in London had been a little bit earlier even, who knows what might have happened. But what is clear is her power and her reputation was dismantled. And Corbyn and John MacDonald and those people, they showed tremendous political courage, because at one point their own party was trying to stab them in the back. And for them to stick in and stick to their principles, you know, and to say exactly what they thought, I think people respected that. And what was remarkable as well, talking about hope, is that a lot of the right-wing press, they have oftentimes delivered because they scare up so many stories, and they were vicious against Corbyn. But what was brilliant this time was many of the young people with social media, there was alternative narratives and alternative conversation created. And that was very, very interesting to see. So I think things are up for grabs now. And I think you know, Theresa May is hanging on by the skin of her teeth just now. And the only reason they're not dumping her now is because they don't want an election, I think.
But it sort of ties in earlier to what you were saying about the welfare issue, because the right-wing press, you know, all you had to do if your anger was going down a bit, pick up a right-wing newspaper, and the front page was moochers and skivers, immigrants, migrants, you know, coming and taking our money. And in a way, I mean, if that spell is broken, if the spell of the Mail and the Express and the Sun is broken, then it is, you know, anything could happen. But they're not stupid, these people, and they will keep it going.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a struggle for consciousness, isn't it? And it's a struggle for people to recognise, actually, I don't earn enough money. My income is not secure enough to get a home. I can't plan my life. I can't plan a family because I don't know if we're going to earn enough to live on. So I think there is a huge the reality of what is happening demands a response. You know, you're told one thing, but life is telling you something else. You know, and that's the job of political leadership, is to say, look, never mind what they say. What is the reality of your experience? You know, and that then leads you to demand change and to demand a certain kind of change.
Yeah, and no, just to say briefly too, but I think this notion of reality impinging on just the national conversation is probably stronger now than ever. There's so many, for example, people. I see there's many young people here. I don't know how it is here, but in the UK now, they've virtually given up the idea of having their own home, which is, you know, remarkable, because that's their lived experience. They're finishing university with £50,000 in debt. Oftentimes they're getting jobs as baristas, you know, in precarious contracts. You know, the Tories are always talking about, well, we have got the least, you know, unemployment in the whole of Europe, but 5 million of these jobs are rubbish jobs. You know, very, very short-term contracts, 0-hour contracts. So you'll maybe get work one day, maybe not another. You can't plan your life, you can't plan a family. And I think a lot of people are just saying, we don't believe your lies anymore. And I think there's also something else which is very, very important. I think people recognise that there's great wealth around, and they see the polarisation of wealth, and they know the statistics, but they're beginning to see it in an absolute, very immediate fashion. And you see how people are treated less if they're deemed to be less. And I think that's why this fire in London has had such a, you know, visceral effect on people as well. I mean, they saved £200,000 by putting on this cheap cladding in one of the richest parts of the whole of the UK. And it just seems to be the epitome of this polarisation and contempt that we're going through. And I think underneath people are beginning to feel very angry about that, despite the propaganda.
I was going to throw. I've just got to say one little thing about the Grenfell. It reminded me of a line of Joe Hill that you've quoted: "Don't mourn, organise." And I was in London last week, and it's incredible to go around that part of North London and see there are meetings every day, there are meetings every week, there are things going on, there are people, and there's nobody. It's not the Labour. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn was there, but it's not the Labour Party doing this. This is from the grassroots. You know, and it is kind of, you think, would this have happened 10, 15 years ago? Because people did, there was an air of defeat. There was an air of like, what's the point? And because this was such a unimaginably horrible tragedy, which was visited upon London, as I say, this is and people are now organising.
I guess everybody knows about this fire, do they? Yeah. A tower block killed, we don't know exactly how many, because the authorities, we know they say 80, but people know there were far more than that. So the secrecy with which it's being treated, and Paul mentioned the cladding, well, they put on cladding that caught fire more easily than the cladding they should have put on because it was cheaper.
£5,000 it was.
Yes. So, I mean...
200,000 was the sprinklers.
Yeah.
It was only £5,000 difference.
Yes. I mean, it was not a huge amount of money, but could well be people died because of that economizing or that, you know, doing things on the cheap. So yeah, if everyone knows, that's great.
In the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which is in Britain is a byword for wealth and affluence, and it was because the rich tenants didn't want to have to look at unclad houses. But at this point, I think we can see if there are any questions or comments for Paul or Ken. Gentleman on the left. Do we have a microphone?
Do you want
for the gentleman? Oh.
Hi. Two things. First of all, as a Manchester United fan, thank you for immortalizing Eric God Cantona for us forever. Second, in this conversation has been like half of it at least is about politics, and I feel obliged to ask you about what became a public feud with Radiohead and Tom York regarding the between you and Tom York of Radiohead and what became. At this stage, what do you think? Why do you think it's important to maintain such a position against, like, whether the cultural boycott against Israel? What kind of message do you think Radiohead is giving by performing in Israel at a time when the right-wing government is, like, expanding in settlements and becoming even more aggressive with its policies more than ever? Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's a very good point. The whole Radiohead, the band, is going to play in Israel in about 2 or 3 weeks' time in Tel Aviv. A number of musicians and writers and different people in the arts have written collectively and in small groups to Radiohead to say, please don't go, because the Palestinian people have asked that there should be a cultural boycott of Israel while it keeps stealing Palestinian land and while it keeps making the lives of Palestinians intolerable through checkpoints, while it encircles Gaza, while it has killed people with impunity, while it has been breach of international law, breaking the Geneva Conventions, and the oppression of Palestinians has gone on since the creation of Israel and intensified after the Six-Day War in '67. So there's a wide feeling that because our government and the American government supports the Israeli government, it supports the Americans, of course, with huge financial sums and armaments, that it's the job of our civil society to say they don't do this in our name and to ask for a boycott. Not a boycott of individual Israelis, certainly not a boycott of anything Jewish. That is not the issue at all. It's not about race. It's about an illegal state taking the land and oppressing another people. So it's on that basis that we've asked Tom York and his friends not to go. And many people have asked them as the same. And there's still time for them. There's another letter gone out just recently saying, look, don't support a state which many people consider to be apartheid. And we could have a long discussion about that, but may not now. As the same way there was a boycott of South African sport, and that brought pressure to bear to end apartheid in South Africa, we urge people not to support Israeli cultural projects that have the backing of the state of Israel. not individual artists.
And can I just add one thing? Ken mentioned it, but this initiative is coming from Palestinians themselves. Remember the first contact, there's a whole number of grassroots organisations, and many of them are so repressed and so powerless themselves. They've said this is something that will help us. It's not something that writers or directors or artists in the UK or the West have organised. The initiative has come from grassroots organisations in Palestine. And I think it's just really, really, really important. It reminds me of a wonderful phrase by Martin Luther King, if I remember it now. And it said, "The hottest place in hell will be kept for those who stay neutral in times of great, moral crisis." And I think, we are being asked by these people to help, and so if we said no, I think you're really siding with the Israeli state.
You cannot be neutral between the fire brigade and the fire.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your cinema, to both of you, and for keeping the ideas of equality and social justice across the audience of the world. As a cinematographer, I'd like to ask something to Ken regarding the fact that I know you own a Reflex studio and you shoot on film stock 35mm. So if you could tell us something about this, in a digital world, why do you want to shoot on film and keep shooting on film? Thank you.
Well, I think film has a quality that is not matched by digital recording. I mean, it's celluloid, it's a chemical process, it receives light differently. It's a totally different way of recording an image. And so, of course, it's different. To me, it has a depth and a nuance of colour that I don't get in digital recordings. Maybe that's my romantic idea, I don't know. Until the last film, we cut on film as well, which was very nice, because at the end of the day, you see the amount of film you've cut. And you go home and think, well, I've done that. And when you cut digitally, there's nothing to see. You just turn the machine off and hope it's there somewhere. So film has you can touch it, you can find it, you can lose a bit of it. There's something, and also you need an extra person in the cutting room, which is very good for film employment. And it's also it's also more convivial, because you have a better chat. If it's so for every reason, social, cinematic, aesthetic, and full employment, I choose film every time.
The real reason is that when they're in the cutting room and then they're rewinding the film to get to the next point, it gives them a chance to listen to the cricket scores. I've seen this.
This is true.
Question in the middle, the microphone will come.
Hello, good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for your presence here. This is a privilege for us. I would like, first of all, to make a comment for you, Paul. May you please tell me whether, if before you mentioned something that you had friends in Madrid. Well, I'm Spanish.
Oh yeah.
And you said maybe that you had. Maybe if I understood you, please tell me that you had friends in Podemos or something, or I misunderstood.
No, I know. I've got lots of friends in Madrid. Some of whom are sympathetic to Podemos.
Okay. So
yes, and some. So they're just
because
general.
I heard this political party and he said, did he said this word? I said, I'm surprised. Thank you for confirming me.
No, some friends are very active politically. Some are with Podemos and some are not. Yeah.
Thank you for confirming this information. And I have a question for you, Ken. Wow, Ken Loach. I would like to know, please, which criteria do you have in order to choose your actors for your films? And this question came to my mind since I thought of in the last film that you made last year, Daniel Blake. And because do you prefer actors who are very emotional, very passionate, that speaks very good English? Do you know what I mean? Which criteria do you have? That's my question. Thank you.
I think you look for people who the audience will believe, that the audience can understand. that the audience will be touched by, the people who will just communicate through film without having to perform at all, people who are true, people you believe, and we do little improvisations to find people, because then when people have to improvise something, you really see who they are, because they can't hide, you know. So they use their own voice, they use their own language, they use their slang, and if it's an emotional scene, you see if they can express emotion or communicate it. You just see if they're true. True in both in their social class, in their age, in where they're from, any dialect. So and every part is very specific. You know, so we just Paul comes along too, you know, at the beginning and at the end for the final choice. So it's a long process, but you just say, well, I believe that person. They have the range of experience and emotions and imagination that we need, and yeah, we'll go with it.
And Dave Johns was quite well known as a stand-up comedian. You've also worked with John Bishop on Route Irish, who's an extremely famous stand-up comedian. We'd like to see more of John Bishop in serious roles. Dave Johns, you've really changed his life. I mean, this guy's now, is he going to continue acting, or is he going to go back to the stand-up?
I think he's doing bits and pieces.
Yeah, he's doing. I think he's in a film just now. He had several. He's a very, very funny man and great fun to be with, I have to say, as was Haley. But I know he'd been offered several parts that he was looking at.
And he'd never been in a film before, I think I might say.
No, I don't think so. But in a way, it's that's okay.
Next question or comment? Right at the front. A microphone will come just so everybody can hear you at the back.
Hi, I read that Jimmy's Hall is now being adapted for the stage. So are you going to be involved in it? And is there any other film that you would like to see on the stage?
Yes, Ken is doing his dancing lessons just now. Yeah.
I was going to say you were getting your singing voice ready, but there you go.
Yeah, it's done by the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. It's a very well-known traditional theatre company, and it's been taken over by. There's a new management in there, and this will be their first project. There's a lovely man called Graham McLaren, who's a Scottish director, and he'll be there for the next 5 years. And so for the first time now, they're actually taking a play out from Dublin to the countryside, and they're going up to Leitrim, where Jimmy Gralton was from. So I'm hearing great reports about it. There's 13 musicians in it, and it sounds like they're having one hell of a laugh. So I hope it works well for them. But we're not working on it. We were very glad to see we passed on the script and the film, and they'll adapt that for stage. Mm-hmm.
The microphone will come. Just so everybody can hear.
Thank you. I'm Narendra from India, and your characters are always in distress and hoping for something to come, a better to come. I want both of you to articulate hope for us. Do you want us to? Articulate hope for us. What is hope for you?
Hope. Yeah, well, hope is well, I've bored Ken to death with this quote many times, but I often, when I'm asked that question, I sometimes quote St. Augustine from 1500 years ago, and he said, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger at the way things are, and the courage to try and change them. And I think that's not too bad, really. I think it's lasted for 1500 years, and I'm sure it'll last another 1500 years.
Hope. Hope is many things. I mean, it can be the hope of promotion for the football team. I mean, that's a big issue. But I think hope that people find the courage to fight back, as Paul says, and the political leadership and organisation to achieve it, to achieve the change, because you can hope for it. You can have political leadership which leads you off in the wrong direction, and you can have good political leadership, they have the right ideas, but they can't organise people getting drunk in a brewery. So you have to have the right political ideas, but you also have the organisation to get it together.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn can organise that?
Well, I mean, only one man can do one thing. I mean, he's reawakened people's determination for change, but you need a big team. The problem we've got is that again, I mean, this is domestic British politics, and I don't know how interesting it is for you, but his party in our parliament is to a large extent hostile to him. So that's a problem. So the parliament, his party in parliament has to be changed. But the membership, which is now huge, I mean, it's by far the biggest party in the whole of Europe. I think there are 800,000 members now. I mean, this is massive for paying members of a political party. They are very enthusiastic, overwhelmingly. But you have this like elite. I almost said central committee, but it's a bit like that. The old nomenclatura, you know, there. That are sort of trying to dampen everything down. So that's the organisational problem, is getting rid of that paralysing elite between a strong leader and the membership.
And it's often said that Jeremy Corbyn is much less enthusiastic about Europe than many of his current supporters, and this could be the disillusionment when because he's said that he's going to work for Brexit. You know, that's going to happen.
I think that's a I think, if I may say, I think that's a misunderstanding of his position. I think what a lot of people on the left say, and I would say it too, is that we absolutely want to be part of a European organisation, but not this one, because this one's about privatisation. It's about putting the profits of working people second and the profits of big corporations first. And you see how they treated Greece, you know, demanded that all their public assets were sold off cheap and insisted that they had a loan they have no capacity to pay back. None of that investment went into public industries that they owned. It all went to people who were owed money, so nothing went to regenerate the Greek economy. So not that Europe, but a Europe that works in the interests of the people. And I can add one thing to that. One thing which is untouched, I'm happy to say, by the European Union issue is the European Film Academy. And the European Film Academy is a terrific institution. It's not a creature of the European Union. It's about film people recognizing that European film is really important, that everyone who works in film can be part of it. And if you do work in film, please be part of it. It's 30 years old. It's championed European films across all the different countries in Europe. It's cherished the diversity. It's been a lobbying organization to get good conditions and some decent treatment for European filmmakers to get their films shown. It's had a lot of good initiatives. And I know the person who's been actually embarrassing now, Marion During, who's been a great champion of the European Film Academy, is here. Mm-hmm. And please do look for it. If you're in films, join it, because you know the old saying is "Together we're stronger." So look out for the European Film Academy.
Marion, do you want to say something quickly? Would you like to?
I think we have Jan-Ole Gerster here. Yeah. He's here. Yes, winner of the best debut for Oh Boy. We have Jan-Ole Gerster from Germany, among many members of the European Film Academy who are here in KVIFF. And as I say, this is partly in celebration of that. We're showing Sweet 16 and we're showing Land and Freedom. One little thing about Sweet 16 and football, because of course Martin Compston, you took him away from the world of professional football. He was going to be a top player for Greenock Morton, and now he's on very successful British TV cop program Line of Duty, and has had an incredible career as an actor. You watch that program with a certain paternal pride, or do you think he could have been a wonderful centre half?
I saw Martin just 2 weeks ago actually, and we keep in contact. And there was also another lovely lad, Paul from Angel Share, I don't know if you saw that little film.
Paul Brannigan.
Paul Brannigan, yeah, another. So you do make friends as you go along with these films, and obviously because Paul and Martin was only 17, I think, when 16.
Yeah.
So you make a very special connection with him, and when you see him flourish and doing really, really well, but also staying a really grounded person who cares about what's going on in the world, it does give you a kick.
Yeah, no, they're both really great lads, really. I don't know. But the good thing about Martin being a footballer is when we have a charity football game, he comes along and plays. So that's good.
We're still trying to get Cantona, mind you. Yeah.
What a combination! I mean, it can't be a coincidence. There's too much football going on here.
Well, this is the great land of Panenka, obviously. I know many of you will be too young to remember that wonderful final and the magnificent penalty when the Czech team won in such great style.
Nedved?
Panenka.
But also Nedved was...
I think he was, yes, that's right.
Dangerous territory here if I get it wrong. Moving on, does anybody have another question?
Or comments, if anybody would like
comments,
to...
Yeah.
Or
yes,
challenge
please,
what we're saying,
the
please say.
The gentleman in the green, I'll give you the microphone.
Oh, hello, I'm Peter from Brixton, South London. I just wanted to bring up an issue on small local issue as your regular Carlo Vivari person. If somebody perhaps could fill in, but I've been trying to find out what's happening to the swimming pool up the hill, and all I get is I don't know from everybody, including the hotel emails. For democracy, you have to have some openness, and my host a year ago said there were rumours going around that it's a prime bit of real estate and developers have got their eyes on it. And this complex was built by a renowned couple of architects and could be listed, which would protect it. But this swimming pool is, something for everybody, not just the hotel goers, unlike the sort of special spa things that you get everywhere. So I just wondered if you could use your influence and...
and go for a swim, yeah. He's going to threaten to put on his swimming trunks and march up that hill right now and go swimming. I think maybe that's a premise there for a young Czech screenwriter there to go and ask some questions of the planning authorities. Yeah.
Another question, maybe something not quite so local, since the swimming pool's just literally there. I mean, we were talking about the European Film Academy and a lot of younger members of that academy. I'm trying to think about current filmmakers who we look at maybe following in your tradition. When you go to festivals, you watch films. Do you see a politicized generation of filmmakers? Because it's very easy to take the shilling and go to Hollywood and make the superhero films, and many interesting directors get sucked into a vortex.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of filmmakers who, I mean, politicized makes it almost sound too narrow, but who care about the way we live and the way the world is going. I think there are a lot. I think the problem is with the commissioners, because they tend to play safe. I mean, I began in television, where it was you could make contemporary drama that was contentious, that was subversive. You can't do that now, and I think so I think it's the problem with the commissioners, and some commissioners, particularly in Europe, depend on government money, and I don't know what pressures there are there, particularly if there's subsidies involved. So all the pressure is not to be political and contentious and argumentative. So, but I mean, we meet. I do, and I know Paul does, meet lots of writers and film directors with great ideas who would make brilliant films. And I'm sure there are some at the festival too. I'm sure there are. No, there's never any shortage of talent. Never.
In terms of who gets to make the films and who gets to tell the stories, it has been said in Britain, particularly by actors. David Morrissey made some comments saying that it's all very well with having upper-class actors, and there's nothing wrong with upper-class actors, but if you have to be rich to go to drama school, and if you have to be rich to go to film school, that has a knock-on effect. And I think we're kind of seeing that now, 9 years after this crisis, as it's called, is talked about. And like people from my area, Sunderland, how does a person, or from Newcastle, how do the young people get to tell those stories because they can't afford to go to film school?
I think it's all to do with the prevailing consciousness as well. I mean, the people who commission the films, they see films about the ruling class as being romantic comedies. They see films about the working class as being about doers, poverty and struggle. And in fact, the richness of comedy and the richness of personal exchange and emotional exchange amongst the vast majority of ordinary people is very rich. But things for the ruling class are like sort of parodied in an affectionate way. So we end up with Boris Johnson as the Foreign Secretary. I mean, who is a parody of a kind of comic novel creature. And he plays that part. He consciously plays that part. But underneath, there's a class warrior. Make no mistake. Like Churchill, appears as the great saviour of the nation. Beneath that was a cruel imperialist, a warmonger, and a class warrior. And never forget that. And that's how the ruling class like to appear. Like Hugh Grant. Lovable, friendly, a bit of trouble now and then, but never mind. He's a nice guy. But beneath the mask, not Hugh Grant, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but beneath the mask, they will drive you down. They will demand that you work for nothing. They will send troops to foreign countries and kill you. So they're not a joke. And that's the problem. Those are the films we don't see being made.
And we see things like Downton Abbey, which, I couldn't believe this program when I watched it, as a caricature of benign, the lord of the manor, and they really want to give the people the best conditions, but they just can't afford it.
I think that's a Tory. I think he was a Tory peer.
Gillian Fellows was made a lord. He's a lord by a lord by the Conservatives.
Now we know what we're doing wrong, my man.
But then he started with Robert Altman. Downton Abbey started off as Gosford Park, and I think Altman would be kind of horrified by what it's become.
And it's funny too. There's an endless appetite too for stories about royalty. The king and the queen and all the... Anyway.
Another question, perhaps, or a comment.
Yeah.
I think we have... I'm going to say about Churchill, we have at least 2 films coming into cinemas this year. We have Brian Cox playing Churchill and Gary Oldman.
I think it'll be safe to say they won't have a scene about him dropping chemical weapons on Iraqis, which he did. I dare say that won't be as part of it.
But have you ever, as a writer, been tempted to tell those kinds of stories and say, you want to make a film about Churchill?
It's not a bad idea, really. Yes. Well, I mean, there's many ways into that, isn't there? Look what he did in Greece, for example. The people that fought against the fascists, against the freedom fighters there. When Churchill moved in afterwards, what did he do? He put them in prison, and the same people that they were fighting were their Nazi guards were back to beating them up and torturing them again, and they can thank Churchill for that. I can safely assume that won't be part of the narrative. Yeah.
And sadly Stalin as well, because it was part of the deal, wasn't it? Greece would come to the West. So,
but it is the hallmark of your filmography that you have made films about real ordinary people, and if you go back to Poor Cow and things like that, and Cathy Come Home, we've been standing here for 6 hours and we haven't mentioned Cathy Come Home, which is a film which had a direct impact on homelessness and the issue of homelessness. I mean, there are still people homeless, but in terms of that. But I remember reading an interview that you gave where you said, I don't expect people to be outraged by Daniel Blake. It was as if you thought, well, I'll make the film and maybe it'll have an impact.
I'm sure they got the quote right, but
from The Guardian. So.
I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that exactly. If I'm trying to think what I did mean. I must have meant that we were all surprised that it had the impact that it did, and pleasantly surprised, of course. But you can't predict that something is going to hit, quite as well. And we were very, fortunate that it did.
There was one lovely thing that happened with that. I'd like to share with you, perhaps, that we had wonderful distributors in the UK for Daniel Blake, E1. And after the film was in the cinemas, we were very, very keen that people who couldn't afford to go to the cinema, I mean, if you're on £27, £30 a week on welfare, if you're a young person, you can't pay £10 to go to a film. So they organised over 600 community screenings up and down the country. And what was remarkable, Ken and myself went to many of them, as many as we possibly could, and they became places of debate. There were some wonderful ones. I'm thinking now of Glasgow in particular, you know, out in the barrios where you know, unemployment was very, very high, and the level of debate was absolutely magnificent and very militant, you know. So it was lovely to see a film used like that, and just using that to talk about their own lives and what they were doing and how they were organising. And they've now, and many of them have now organised supporters who will accompany people to go to, you know, job centres like Daniel Blake does to help people through. So there's been a lot of practical stuff done as well.
I mean, I think one thing about that, it is quite interesting, and maybe a way forward for distributors is that, because normally what happens, the film plays in the cinema, and as we all know, I mean, European films have a struggle to get in the cinemas often. They play in the cinemas, then it dies, and then you can buy a DVD or get it online or whatever the latest technology is. Well, this idea that they would give or they would hire like a DVD or a connection, however, Blu-ray or whatever it is, for it to be screened by a community in a centre, above a bar, in a football club, anywhere that people can gather. And it was a very low price, but then those people can charge for admission. They can raise money for a local cause. They can keep whatever I think it was £80 they charged. Well, if you've got 80 people and they pay £1 each, you know, 80 people who pay €1 each or whatever, that's pretty easy. Or 40 people and you pay 2. I mean, it's not a lot of money. And then after that, you keep what's there and can go to the community. So that seemed a real way forward, distribution-wise, a model that could be used again. Well, I hope it could.
Like a football game, we've been given 90 minutes, so we do have an eye on the clock. If anybody has a question or comment, because I've got... yes,
or a comment.
The lady in the front.
I have a question, sorry. I just want to ask, how do you feel about being written about or talk about as the icon of British social realism style?
Embarrassed, really. I mean, the problem is you never... When we're thinking of doing a film, we don't say, let's do a social realist film, you know, because people will run from the cinema in their thousands, you know. Nobody will ever go and watch one. So it's a term used by critics and people who teach film, and in order to have something to say, they have to categorize everything. Then you'll do a lesson about social realism, but it never crosses our minds, really. So I'd be happily never to hear the phrase again, to be honest.
I think it's a distortion, because really all the Hollywood films should say an unrealistic film by so-and-so. Yeah. That was going to tie in with the two questions I was going to end with, one of which was looking back, one of which was looking forward. Here we are in KVIFF. You've both been given Crystal Globes separately, but you know, it's a recognition of an incredible team, which we hope continues for a long time. But the thing is that there is so much anger, there are so many stories. Current, you know, you pick up the newspaper, there are 50 films there. Do you two ever look back down the list of films and kind of go, this has worked out pretty well, or do you allow yourself the luxury of just sticking on Kess and going, wow?
You can't look back. I mean, it would be stultifying. You can't. You part of what. Well, there are lots of things that propel you to try and work, but one is dissatisfaction with what you've done before, really, because you know, just think, well, I could have done that better, or you know, we haven't tried that, or we could try that. It's you can only look forward, I think.
Yeah, no, I think there's sometimes, you know, we look back and say, oh, we missed a trick there, you know, maybe if we'd done that. I mean, I think if I'd done a better job with the script, as the first script with Carla's song, especially the second half of the thing, it would have been a better film. But these are things it's very easy to look back in hindsight, isn't it? But I think that what we try and do is just be our own toughest critics for the next one. And that's all you can do. That's all you can do.
But I think the Kalavivari Prize is unique because a crystal ball is about looking into the future.
Well, let's see if it helps. Right.
And the two questions to wrap up on. Number one, you've got this incredible filmography, 2 Palme d'Ors under your belt. When you go to the money men and money women and money people to get the money for the next project, do the doors now fly open? Or is it still you have to use a chisel to get through that door?
Well, that brings in the third very important person in our relationship, and we should have said earlier is Rebecca O'Brien, who's our producer.
I've been quoting her at copious length.
Yeah, we asked her to come, but she couldn't be bothered coming with us, I don't think. She's had enough of us. But she's a wonderful, a wonderful partner with us. And Rebecca does all that work. And I have to say, Ken probably does too, but it's a great revelation for it as a writer not to be involved in any of that, quite apart from the fact I don't understand a single word that she says to me about it. But it's a lot of hard work, and she's very creative and massively dependable and brilliantly organised.
I mean, for over 20 years now, the money that we've raised for the film has come across Europe. And again, that's been some co-productions. It's been some people, television stations that pre-buy, distributors buy the film in advance. And we're cheap, we don't cost a lot of money, and that helps. But I have to say, because obviously there will be some form of leaving the European Union, part of our co-production deals depends on workers from other countries coming to work on the film. I mean, Belgium, for example, will invest a little bit of money in our films because we'll have some Belgians working in the lighting department or in the camera department, and they bring their gear, and they bring chocolate, and they do and beer. Yeah, no, and they bring records of Jacques Brel, and that's even better. So it's good. It's good because they're good people, and it just enriches the whole group. But also it triggers some money. Now, if that is made very bureaucratic and difficult because of us leaving the European Union, that will threaten those co-productions, which will then make it more difficult. So that is a danger that might happen.
So, on behalf of the Kalavivari International Film Festival, I would just say, long live teamwork, long live European cooperation, long live our incredible guests today, long live Paul Laverty, long live Ken Loach.
Thanks very much, and thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much.